Welcome to Master's Bible School. We are going to be going over 1 Samuel. Glad to have you here. Hopefully you can hear me. I wish I could see you all. So we are going to be covering 1 Samuel 16 through the end of the book. So Jason, could you throw up our outline? So we're going to finish the book of 1 Samuel. And last week we talked about the rise and fall of Saul, the Agag incident. And this week we're going to be covering the rise of David, Goliath, and Saul's jealousy, and finishing up the book of 1 Samuel. So let's dive right into it and see if we can fly through these 15 chapters of a very, very important man in the Word of God, the grandfather of our Lord in Christ. So starting in 1 Samuel 16, God tells Samuel to go to Jesse's house and to pick out a king because the Lord said that he's rejected Saul. Now the Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king from his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. But the Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. That's what we all do when we want to disguise ourselves. We grab our heifer and we take off. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me the one I am to name to you. So Samuel did as the Lord said, and he went to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, Do you come peacefully? And he said, Peacefully I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons, invited them to the sacrifice. So it was, when they came, that he looked at Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. So Samuel looks at Jesse's oldest son, I believe, and says, This is the one. This is obviously the one that God wants us, because he was probably just Herculean. But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see a man as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And that is our key verse for the MBS students is, can you flip back to the outline? Key verse is 1 Samuel 16:7. So for those of you that are studying this, you'll need to memorize this along with the outline, and you'll be tested on that. 1 Samuel 16:7, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Samuel goes through all of Jesse's sons, and Samuel says to Jesse, Are all the young men here? Then he said, There remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. Such a person that Jesse didn't even think, he shouldn't even come to the sacrifice. Not even the first thought or the seventh thought. Send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was a ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. Remember that, in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Verse 14, But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said to him, Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servant who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful at playing at the harp, and And it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well. I don't know how the servant knew that that was the way you dealt with the distressing spirit, but it worked. So Saul said to his servant, provide for me now a man who can play well and bring him to me. Then one of the servants answered and said, look, I have seen a son of Jesse, a Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person. And the Lord is with him. So Saul said, bring him in. We're going to have some harp playing to deal with my distressing spirit. Not your everyday occurrence, but the Lord is directing David to the king's house. Chapter 17, Goliath challenges Israel. So chapter 17 is about a conflict between the Philistines and the Israelites, and they meet at a valley called the Valley of Elah, or Elah. So the Philistines came from Gath, and the Israelites came from this area, and they meet in the Valley of Elah, which, where is it here? Azariah, Zachariah, right here. Right here? Okay, right around here. Am I correct? Okay, so they come from Gath. That's where Goliath was from. And this is, can you zoom out, Jay? And is this the one that shows Saul's kingdom? Can you flip to that one, would you mind? So this is Saul's kingdom. The green, is it? Or the pink, Jay? The pink. So Gath is not part of Saul's kingdom. This is Bethlehem here. And they kind of meet in the middle here in a valley to fight. Fighting in a valley was probably desired after because you could have some room to move around. You weren't in the rocks and the hills and everything. So they come from Gath. The Israelites come from the east, and they meet in the Valley of Elah and drew up battle array against the Philistines. Verse 3, the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And a champion came out from the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, 9 feet 9 inches, approximately between 600 and 700 pounds. Big guy. Would you mind flipping to the slide showing those two? So I don't know how well you can see this, but this man is 5'11", which would have been a very, 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 very tall man for the Jews. This man is 8'11". Huge difference there. This looks like a child. So David was probably shorter than this man, and Goliath was taller than this man. Just to give you kind of a perspective on size there. Big guy. 9 feet 9 inches, approximately 600 pounds, and we get some description of him here. It was obviously a shocking sight. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, 125 pounds. He had a bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, 2 hands, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And you, the servants of Saul, choose a man for yourself, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. But Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistines, and they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So Saul comes out, says, send out a man. We don't all have to fight. And David is headed from the sheepfold with some cheese for his brothers. He takes off to the battlefield because Dad says, I think the boys are hungry, David. Send them some food. He takes off and he meets up with his brothers, and David hears about the challenge. Let's see. And says, okay, verse 26, Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, So shall it be done for the man who kills him. Now, Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. Eliab was the person that Samuel said, this is the one. This is the one that we need to anoint king. But God saw his heart. Eliab was angry, and his anger was aroused against David, and he said, Why did you come down? And to whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? Saying, you can't even watch the sheep. Why'd you come here? Let's see. I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when David heard which was the words which was spoken, they reported it to Saul, and he sent to them. Then David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now David is a young man, so much so that Jesse didn't even think about bringing him to the sacrifice and just left him with the sheep. He's a lad. This is amazing coming from a lad saying he's going to tackle a 9-foot, 9-inch man weighing 600 pounds. David says, I can take him. Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose against me, I caught it by the beard and struck it and killed it. This is a tough little guy. My goodness. I don't know how many of you have caught a lion by the beard and struck it, but I have not, and especially when I was an adolescent. Okay, so David's a feisty little guy. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. No, moreover, David said, The Lord deliver me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said, Go ahead. Go on. So David goes out to the battlefield, and they meet. Verse 40 here. I'll try to go through this quickly. Then he took his staff out of his hand, and he chose for him 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had in his sling, which was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So, can we play that video now? This is a video from Israel. My father was in this valley, and you'll see the 2 mountains. So, Travis is standing on the mountain where the Israelites would be. There's a valley here, and then there's a mountain on this side where the Philistines would be. And Goliath was probably somewhere in the middle, close enough to where he could hear David. So go ahead and play the video, give you kind of a perspective here.
Then David said to the Philistine, You come come to me with sword, with a spear, with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands.
So they read the verse there. I don't know if you guys could see, but there was a hill on one side, there was a hill on the other, a valley in between, and actually there was a little dry brook that went right through the middle of it, well, on the Israelite side, that a man could walk through, just as it says, and pick up 5 smooth stones. So Dad read that part. I'll skip that. Then David put his hand so let's see here. Then verse 48. So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. Now, I don't know how fast Goliath was running, but I find it interesting that Goliath was running at him, and David was running at him. Let's see here. No, it doesn't say that Goliath was running. It just says that David was running. So I don't know if Goliath was running, but David was running, and he slung a sling, and it sunk under the Philistine's forehead. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. David didn't have a sword. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head. And then the Philistines saw that what happened. They fled. Their champion was dead, and the Israelites chased after them. And let's see. And fell on rows. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shemaron, even as far as Gath and Ekron. So they chase them all the way back to Gath and Ekron, kind of their strongholds. Chase them all the way back to their cities. Quite a trek, just by one little boy killing one man that gave the whole army of Israel courage that was shaking in their boots before. It's amazing how if one person will do what's right and follow the Lord and trust in him, the others will gain courage and follow. Okay, so chapter 18. So Jonathan and David become great friends, and Saul becomes a great enemy. Let's see here. Verse 5, David went out wherever Saul went and behaved wisely. David's going out to fight with the Philistines, with Saul. Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of all the city of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Jealousy. Saul wants to be the one that is slaying the 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. What petty jealousy. Now, what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul realizes that David's rising up and that Saul is decreasing, but that's what the Lord told Saul when he disobeyed and sacrificed. The Lord told him that was going to happen. It happened the next day that the distressing spirit from the Lord, from God, came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. So Saul's sitting there in whatever state he's in, and he's got a spear in his hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. So I'm not sure if that's referring to the time we're going to talk about here in a little bit, or maybe there was another time where Saul chucked a spear at David. Saul has a bad habit of chucking spears at people, we're going to find out, but he's not a very good shot. He seems to miss everybody. So good news for David and for Jonathan and so on. Okay, let's see here. Anything else I need to go over here? Yeah, 28. So David is sent out of Saul's house. He takes and fights with the Philistines again. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, verse 28, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was whenever they went out that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. So his reputation, the Lord's lifting him up in the sight of the Israelites. Chapter 19, Jonathan's warning. Now Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all the servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted greatly in David. So Jonathan told David, saying, My father Saul seeks to kill you. Therefore, please be on your guard until morning. If David hadn't figured out that the spear being thrown at him was Saul trying to kill him, he has Jonathan telling him now, my dad's going to try to kill you. Be on your guard. And stay in a secret place and hide. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. I will speak with my father about you. Then what I observe, I will tell you. So Jonathan finds out his dad has ill intent. Saul throws a spear at David again. Verse 8, Saul sends messengers to kill David. David flees to Samuel's house, or the place where Samuel is, and I had to read this because it is so funny. The Lord has an amazing sense of humor. So Saul's sending people to try to kill David. David flees to Samuel's house. Well, what does the Lord do when soldiers are sent to a prophet's house? Well, we'll find out. Verse 18 of chapter 19. So David fled and escaped and went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he said, Saul went, and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. Do we have Naioth up there? Or Ramah? Here's Ramah up here. And I'm not seeing Naioth.
Very small town.
Okay. Somewhere up in this area. So, now it was told Saul, saying, take note, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to David, and when they saw the group of prophets prophesying and Samuel standing as leader over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So Saul sends his soldiers to get David. They show up, everybody's prophesying, and they just get struck with prophesying, and they're prophesying. They couldn't do the task. And when Saul was told it, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. So the Spirit was very heavy on that place. All the soldiers were getting the slain in the Spirit, so to speak. So, and they prophesied likewise. Then Saul sent messengers again a third time, and they prophesied also. Then he also went to Ramah. So he's like, forget this. I'm going to go do it myself. And he came to the great well that is at Shekah. So he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And someone said, indeed, they are at Naioth in Ramah. So he went there to Naioth at Ramah. Then the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went out and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. So he didn't even get there before he started prophesying. He shames himself here, or I think it was probably the Lord shaming him. And he also stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore they said, is Saul also among the prophets? So I just see the Lord's humor in that Saul's going to go and kill David, and God just anoints him with uncontrollable prophecy that they could not keep from, and they couldn't do the task that Saul had sent them to do because they were prophesying. And Saul is laying there with no clothes on, prophesying. It's just an odd way, but the Lord works in mysterious ways, and he was protecting David. So if God's protecting you, there is nothing that anybody can do to you. If he has to slay your enemies with prophecy, he will. So chapter 20. David tests Saul. Then David said to Jonathan, indeed, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king to eat. But let me go, that I may hide in the field until the third day at evening. So there's a feast, and David was one of the mighty men, so he should be at the feast. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked permission for me that he might run over to Bethlehem, his city, for there is an early sacrifice there for all the family. So tell him that I took off to go help Ma and Pa with the sacrifice. If he says thus, it is well, your servant will be safe. But if he is very angry, be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore you shall deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there is iniquity in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? Jonathan says, far be it from you, for if I knew certain that evil was determined by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you? Then David said to him, you will tell me. For what if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. And so they arrange a way on how they're going to tell each other. And let me see here. It's by shooting arrows. Yeah, shooting arrows. Jonathan says, if I shoot an arrow and I send my servant and I say, oh, it's farther away, then that means that Dad's angry at you. I don't know why Jonathan just didn't tell David that was angry at him. It would have been the simpler way, and they wouldn't have lost an arrow. But that's the way they did it. So Saul's angry at him, and let's see. Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan. So Saul's like, where's David? Jonathan says, oh, he went to sacrifice with his dad. And Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, verse 30. And he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. He's shaming him and his mother. Has nothing to do with him. You'll find that when somebody gets overtaken by bitterness, they're never in the wrong. Everybody else is all in the wrong, but they're never in the wrong. Pretty soon, the whole army of Saul, he's just yelling at all of them. So it's Jonathan and his mom now. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse as your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? He's just a nasty guy here. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. For therefore, sin and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. And Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said to him, why should he be killed? What has he done? Jonathan's like, Dad, what has he done except been an amazing soldier? Then Saul casted spirit him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. So Jonathan figured out Saul's trying to kill David by Saul trying to kill his own son. It's just bitterness blinds you. Bitterness just blinds Saul completely. And envy and just anger towards God and towards David, and it turns into anger towards everybody. Now Saul's trying to kill his firstborn son. That's how messed up he is. So they're very sad, and as soon as the lad had gone, David arose from the place. So Jonathan tells him, that his dad, he sends the servant on and says the arrow is further on, and Jonathan and David come out and give hugs and weep and say, may the Lord be between you and me and between your descendants and my descendants forever. So he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Okay, 21. Law of love. David takes the showbread, and I wanted to stop on this for just a little bit because it's referenced in Matthew 12:3, and Jesus refers to it when the Pharisees were rebuking him about the Sabbath, that he said, have you not even read the scriptures when David took the showbread? So 12:1, now therefore, okay, let's start in 2. So David said to Amalek the priest, David's running away from Saul. David says to Amalek the priest, the king has ordered me on some business and said to me, do not let anyone know anything about the business which I have sent you or what I have commanded you, that I have directed my young men to such and such a place. So David says, I'm on a secret mission. Let me try that again. I'm on a secret mission. You can't tell anybody that I'm here. Now David's lying to him. And to save his own, to protect himself, David didn't need to lie. But he says, now therefore, what do you have in your hand? I'm hungry. Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever it can be found. And the priests answered David and said, there is no common bread on hand, but there is only holy bread. The holy bread was only to be eaten by the priests. It was the show bread that was set out before the Lord. And after it was brought in, the priests were the only ones by the Levitical law that were allowed to eat it. But David is starving, and we find out here that the law of love trumps the law of the letter. That it'd be better to give a starving man food that's holy than to keep that holy food because God said don't let anybody eat it. There's no common bread. If the young men have at least kept themselves from women. Then David answered the priest and said to him, truly, women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. We're holy. We haven't seen or been with any women for 3 days, so we're holy. And the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessels this day. So the priest gave him holy bread, and there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. So this is the kicker. Now a certain man of the servant of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. So there was a snitch in the house. David takes off, but he doesn't forget to grab a sword. The priest says, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Eli. There it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Now, I don't know what the sword of a 9-foot knight-edge man that weighs 600 pounds and his metal of armor weighs probably 200 with the helmet and the leggings and the chainmail and the spear. He's probably 800 pounds total. It was a short sword? Okay. So it was not, just picture David carrying this sword out. But that's probably not what it was. It was probably something that David could handle. Okay, so David fled, and David flees to Adullam. Chapter 22. Whew. Okay, chapter 22. David therefore departed from there, and he takes care of his parents. David was an honorable man. He took care of his parents. He knew that his parents were in danger. So David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Let's see here. Do we have Adullam on this map, Jay? Up here. Okay, so I'm not sure where he was with Jonathan. It probably says, but he escapes over here. So he escapes up to here, up to Adullam, in a cave. There's tons of caves in Adullam. We tried to get some pictures for you, but there's just lots and lots of caves. Good place for hiding. and he's depressed. He's very depressed. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. So his family hears that he's in Adullam, and they take off to be with David. And everyone, verse 2, who was distressed, everyone who was in debt, everyone who had discontent, who was discontented, gathered to him. Quite a motley crew. It sounds like the disciples to me. Kind of just a hodgepodge group that gathered around David. And let's see. Okay. So he became captain over them. He's captain over all these debtors and discontent people that were mad and people that were distressed. So the people that were having anxiety, the people that were in debt, and the people that were discontent, they just all gathered around David and his family. So there was about 400 men. Then David went from there, from Mizpah, to Moab. So he gets his mom and dad, and he goes to Moab and says to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and my mother come here with you till I know what the Lord will do for me." So David is here, and he travels down to Moab of Mizpah of Moab. Long trek. He's getting his family out of town because Saul is after him and wants blood. So he takes his family here to protect them against Saul. He's concerned about his mother and his father. So that's Ruth's home area. So that would have been David's great grandma's family. So David's taking him back to family. He's taking him back to great grandma's family. He's like, "Hey, can you watch over great grandma's son?" I guess it would be. Yeah, Jesse. "Can you watch over Ruth's son?" That makes a lot more sense. Why he took him there. Okay, so this is the horrendous chapter of what bitterness will do in your life. If you like bitterness and you want to keep it, read this chapter. Then Saul heard that David and his men who were with him had been discovered. This is verse 6. Let's see. Do I have this right? Yes. Oh, before we go on to that, Proverbs 28:28 says, "When the wicked arise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase." So Saul's reigning, and he's reigning in terror right now. He's throwing spears at everybody, and everybody's just hiding from him. So Saul hears that David has been discovered, and Saul says to his servants who stood by him, "Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you a field and a vineyard?" He's just enraged at everybody. He's like, "Is David going to give you guys all something? And make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? Is he just going to give you such a big tax cut, and he's just going to give you everything you want? All of you have conspired against me." Everybody's conspiring against Saul now. "And there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as it is this day." So he's saying David is lying in wait to kill him. And nobody will tell him where David is. And everybody hates him. And everybody's all just waiting to strike him. And he's just fighting against everybody. Well, that's what it looks like to Saul, but that's not the reality. The reality is everybody's like, Saul's having another conniption. Okay, everybody take the spears away from Saul. Get him away. Then one of the servants answered, Doeg, and said, Sir, I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob. Do I get a vineyard? I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Amalek, the son of Ahitub. So Saul turns his rage towards David on Amalek. He's just a viper, and he's going to strike. He's been hit, and he's going to strike at whatever comes before him. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him his provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. He armed him. That wicked priest, the priest was just trying to honor the Lord. Saul's just enraged here. And he said, "Hear now, O son of..." So the king sent to call Amalek, the priest, the son of Ahitub. I don't think that's how it's pronounced. And all of his father's house, and the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, O son of Ahitub." Ahimelech, son of Ahitub. He answered, "Here am I, my lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the sons of Jesse?" You and the son of Jesse. So he's just lumping him in with David. You've conspired against me, my men have conspired against me, and the son of Jesse has conspired against me. Everybody just hates me. Nobody likes me. I think I'll just go eat worms. So he says, "Why have you conspired against me?" And you gave him bread. How dare you give David bread? How could you do that? And a sword, and have inquired to God for him. You talked to God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as it is this day. So Saul's just convinced that David's hiding behind a rock, just ready to ha. So Amalek answered the king and said, "And who among all the servants is as faithful as David? David's the best guy you've got." So it is the king's son-in-law. He's your son-in-law. He married your daughter, who goes out at your bidding and is honorable in your house. Did I then begin to inquire of the Lord for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to any of the house of my father. For your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much. Which he's right. David said, "I'm on a secret mission for Saul, so don't tell anybody." So he's like, he was hungry. I gave him some bread, and he didn't have a sword. Then the king said, let's see, "You shall surely die." What horrible, horrible things bitterness does to everybody. He tried to kill his son. Now he's going to kill all the priests, all the priest's family, all the priest's children, all the priest's sheep, and there's going to be one guy that escapes and runs to David and tells him. Then the king said to the guard who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord." I mean, just is horrible. "Because their hand also is with David, because they knew when they fled and did not tell it to me. But the servant of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord." So the servants are like, we're not striking them. So guess who he gets to do it? And the king said to Doeg, "Turn and kill the priests." So Doeg, the Edomite, turned and struck the priests and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. This guy is a nasty man. He kills 85 priests. Don't let bitterness root in your life, because it will do this to you. If you want to know what it's going to do, it will do this. Also Nob, the city of the priest, he struck with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys, and sheep with the edge of the sword, all because Ahimelech gave David some bread and a sword. And I'm glad that God chose to use him as an example in the New Testament of a man who truly loved, because Ahimelech received cursing for his blessing. One of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar escaped and fled to David and told him what had happened. And David said to him, "Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life." David's like, we're in the same boat, so you might as well stay with me. 23. Whew. Oh my goodness. Okay. So David, in chapter 23, does Saul's job, and as Saul tries to kill David. Basically, 23 is David smites the Philistines, which is what Saul was supposed to be doing, and Saul is just chasing him around trying to kill David. So David's actually doing the will of the Lord, what Saul was supposed to be doing, and Saul's just chasing David around. So that's 23. There we go. So in my Bible, it says David smites the Philistines and Saul chases David. So David's really trying to get him, as you can see. 24. David spares Saul's life. Okay, so then Saul took, this is verse 2, 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. Sounds like a kind of treacherous place. Rocks of the wild goats. Do you know where that is, Jay? En-Gedi? En-Gedi. Okay, so somewhere around here. I'm guessing that's probably on the coastline.
Up against the Dead Sea.
Rocky terrain. There's a spring there, so David could get something to drink. And Saul. So they're just kind of just spinning out in this area, chasing. David's running and killing the Philistines, and Saul's running after him and chasing him. So kind of a weird life Saul lived, but okay. Then Saul took 3,000, and they looked for him in the rocks of the wild goats. So he came to the sheepfold by the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend his needs, which means he went to use the restroom. David and his men were staying in the recess of the cave. So Saul is like, I'll be right back. And he climbs into this cave to use the restroom. And David and his men are like, Saul just came in the cave. It's just like, so David sneaks up there. Let's see. David sneaks up there. The men are like, David, this is the day which the Lord has said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemies into your hands. They're just whispering, because Saul's like right over there. And you may do to him as it seems good to you. So, he tried to, spear you. You might just give him a little stab. And David arose and secretly cut off the corner of his robe. So he literally sneaks up to Saul as he's using the restroom and cuts off the little corner of his robe. And this is how kind-hearted David is. Now it happened after that David's heart troubled him because he had cut off Saul's robe. So David's like, I shouldn't have cut off his robe. That was the wrong thing to do. Even though he's tried to spear me against the wall 3 times and I'm running from him and he killed all the priests, I shouldn't have cut his robe off. Just, he's so tender towards the Lord. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, to the Lord's anointed. I cut off the corner of the Lord's anointed's robe to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is anointed by the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. So all of the people that are in debt, displeased with Saul, and in distressed. So just this motley crew that he's holding back, and they're all like have knives in their teeth and are just glimmering to go get Saul. And David's like, I cut his robe off. Stay back. And so David arose after and went out of the cave and called to Saul, saying, my lord the king. And Saul's like, what? I think he was probably freaked out. Then Saul looked behind him, David stooping with his face to the earth, and bowed down. David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, indeed, David seeks your harm? Why are you listening to these people that say, I'm trying to kill you? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. And somebody, I'm not going to say who, someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see. He's calling Saul his father. See, yes, see, the corner of your robe is in my hand. For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Now, and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my heart. In my hand. And I have not sinned against you, yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. So David says, I'm going to let the Lord judge between you and me, but I am not going to kill you, Saul. And shows him the garment. So it was when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, that Saul said, Is it your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. Then it's just, is it your voice, my son David? He's such a freak. This is what happens. Don't let bitterness. He hates what he's doing. Saul hates what he's doing. He hates that he's attacking David. He probably hates that he just killed all the priests. He hates that he has this in his heart, but he has allowed it to be there. And so it's going to be there. Until, remember the parable of the man who has the demons cast out and then they come back 7 times stronger? Well, Saul has a little problem here that he can't seem to get rid of. He lifts up his voice and he weeps and he says, You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded good, whereof I rewarded evil. And you have shown this day how you have dealt with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he not get away safely? Therefore, may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And so Saul says, there's no repentance there. Saul's not apologizing for trying to kill him. Saul's not repenting before the Lord. When David was caught in adultery, David says, Against you and you alone have I sinned. And he repents to the Lord. Saul is not repenting here. He's just sorry. He's really sorry that he's that mean to David. He's just really, really sorry. And you may know somebody in your life that is controlled by bitterness. They'll blow up, and then they'll just feel bad about what they did and realize that they were really out of whack and just doing things that were out of control. And they're hurt. They still have a conscience, but he's not going to apologize for what he did to David. He's not going to say, "Oh, please forgive me," and he's not going to say it to the Lord. Okay, chapter 25. So they just part ways. Kind of David and his men go one direction, and Saul and his men go the other. And Saul's men are like, "We had him right there." Then so 25. Then Samuel died. The Israelites gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Okay, we're going to try to buzz through this. David and Abigail. So there's this guy that has a bunch of sheep, thousands in fact. He has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And David's men, as they're roaming around, protect him. A man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. Let's see. Do we have Carmel up here? Yeah, here we go. So down here, so this is where the rocks were. They buried Samuel in Ramah up here. And David goes to Carmel, and they're shearing the sheep. And when they shear the sheep, it's this big celebration. They're just celebrating, and they are going to butcher some sheep. And David sends some men down and says, I have heard that your servants are shearing. your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them. We could have come in and got some food because we were hungry. We're living in the rocks here, but we didn't hurt them. Your servants with us, we didn't hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Not only did we not hurt them, but we protected them. We kept them safe from marauders. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, he says, talk to your young men, talk to your shepherds. They're going to tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on the feast day. Please give whatever comes to your hand and to your servants and to your son David. David's humble here. He says, can you give some food to your son David? We protected your sheep. Then David's young men came and spoke to Nabal. You can cross out Nabal and write fool. That's what his name means, fool. This is a perfect picture of a fool in the Bible. Then David's young men came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away from their masters. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers? Look at what I've done. My bread, my meat, my water, my shearers. It's all mine. Just selfish and not realizing what David had done for him. And he mocks David. He says, there's lots of runaway slaves these days. Who's David? He's just another runaway slave. So David's young men turned and left. But as they left, one of the young men told Abigail, hey, David's going to be mad about this. So you might want to pack a bag and get out of town. So the men said, now therefore, no one consider what you should do. For harm is determined against your master and against all his household, for he is such a scoundrel that no one can speak to him. It's another picture of a foolish man. Really good example. The word scoundrel is literally son of Belial. That was a curse that they said to Jesus, wasn't it? They called Jesus son of Belial, son of the devil. But this guy nobody can talk to him. He's a son of Belial. And so Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 sheaves of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins. And then she takes off with the donkey and meets David. David's coming down, and he's like, you think that you're going to get away with that? I've got 700 really grumpy and hungry guys. We're going to come and take care of you, Nabal. So Abigail meets him. She pacifies David's anger, gives him this gift, and David blesses her. Now Abigail went to Nabal, and they were holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. Nabal is just, he was probably saying, man, I'm going to have to tear down bigger barns and tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Like this parable of the man who didn't know that his life was going to be taken from him. And Nabal's heart was very merry within him, for he was very drunk. Smart guy. Therefore, she told him nothing, little or much, until morning. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and became like a stone. Then it happened after about 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. It's just like, he's dead. Who's going to take it? Who is his water and his meat and the shears and everything that he has? Who's it now? Not his. So David heard that Nabal had died, and he said, bless the Lord who has pleaded my cause and my reproach from the hand of Nabal. And David takes Abigail as his wife. Chapter 26. We're going to get through this really quickly, hopefully. So David spares Saul's life again. David rises up. Saul's camping out, and he's actually trying, I think he's going to fight the Philistines at this time, not chasing after David. Oh, he is chasing after David. Word came and it said, is David not hiding in the hills of Hachilah? So Saul's back on his rant, trying to kill David. So they're camping there, and they're all asleep in the middle of the night. David rose up, and he's like, hey, they're all sleeping right there. And David went over and stood. Okay, David arose and came to the place where Saul was encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Now Saul lay within his camp, with the people encamped all around him. So David's tiptoeing through soldiers, and there's Abner, and here's Saul. Quite a painted picture here. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the camp, and his spear stuck in the ground by his head. His spear is sticking next to his head. And Abner and the people lay all around him. The Abishai said, God has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now therefore, please let me strike him at once with the spear right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him. Do not, for you cannot stretch out his hand. For who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? So David spares him, grabs his spear, takes out of the camp, and David says, hey, Saul! Now David went over to the other side and stood on the top hill far off, a great distance being between them. And David called out, actually he says, hey, Abner, you're a loser! He calls and says, do you not know Abner? Then Abner answered and said, who are you calling out to the king? So David said, Abner, are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then do you not guard your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy, he doesn't even say it's him. For one of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. This thing that you have done is not good. And as the Lord lives, you deserve to die because you have not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see there the king's spear and the jug of water that was by his head. Then Saul knew it was David's voice. And Saul says, is that your voice? Oh, my son David. My son David, is that your voice? I know I've been trying to kill you, but I just want to hear your voice. And David said, it is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, why does my lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done? Or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore, please let my lord the king hear the word of his servant. If the Lord has stirred up against me, let him accept an offering. But if the children of men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from sharing the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. So now, do not let my blood fall on the earth before the face of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Not sure what that means, but I think he's saying he's helpless. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will harm you no more. This day, because my life was precious in your sight this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. Then David answered and said, here's the king's spear. Let one of the young men come and get it. He sticks it in the ground. He's like, you want your spear back? It's here, but I'm hightailing it. I'm not coming in there. I've had it with you. So chapter 27, David joins with the Philistines. And David's kind of doing some counter-espionage here. We'll click through it really quick. Chapter 27, David kind of gets in cahoots with the Philistines down in Gath, which is over in Gath, right? So David was here, then he was here, and then he goes over to here. And is there with the king of Gath, And David is raiding all around Gath and just pillaging and destroying the Philistines, which is what the Lord wanted the children of Israel to do, was to cast the Philistines and the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites, all of them, out of the land. And so David would save neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath. So he's going around, he's marauding. Well, not marauding, he's doing what the Lord had said to do, but he didn't leave anybody alive, lest they should inform to us, saying, thus David did. And thus was his behavior all the time he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So David would come in, and the king be like, well, I see you got lots of gold there. Where'd you get that from? He's like, oh, I went into Israel, and I raided in there. And he's just like, oh, this is great. They're going to hate David, and he's my warrior now. So Achish believed David, saying, he has made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore, he will be my servant forever. The Philistine king is like, I've got him in the palm of my hand now. Okay. Samuel 28. Samuel's dead. Saul wants to hear from the Lord. Saul cannot hear from the Lord, probably because he's been trying to kill David. So, what does Saul do? Saul visits a medium, a witch doctor. Now, Exodus 22:18 says that those people are supposed to be put to death. And in fact, Saul did put them to death. Samuel 15:23. Just give a little perspective here. Oh, that's not the right verse. That's rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as the iniquity of idolatry. So that doesn't really apply. But it's a good verse. Rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, which Saul was in rebellion to the Lord, and therefore he went to witchcraft. That's where it connects. And so Saul goes, and he's like, Samuel's not here. Saul said to his servant, find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. So his servant found a woman and said, in fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. Endor, for you Star Wars fans. Where's Endor? Is it? It's not on this map, but it's somewhere there. Okay, so Saul's at Endor. And Saul disguised himself because the witches were afraid of him, because Saul would kill them. Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes, and he went, and 2 men with him. And he said, please conduct a seance for me and bring up for me one I shall name you. And the woman said, look, you know that what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritans from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. And the woman said, whom shall I bring up? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. Then the woman saw Samuel, and when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out aloud. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. So, why was the woman surprised? She was not expecting Samuel. She called up Samuel, and Samuel came. She was expecting a familiar spirit, a spirit that would disguise itself, and the person would be like, oh, there's Samuel. She was freaked out, and she's like, it's Saul. It's actually Samuel. And she's freaked out. Saul's freaked out. And Saul said, what did you see? And she said, I saw a spirit ascending from the earth. Now, just a cross-reference here, Luke 16, Samuel's not sleeping. He's awake, and he's coherent, and he's talking. Luke 16 talks about Hades, and there's a place that people go when they die, and it's said to be in the heart of the earth. Well, where does Samuel come up out of? I saw him ascending out of the earth. So Samuel comes out of Hades, And he said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is covered with mantles. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped his face to the ground and bowed down. And Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed. Saul's talking to dead Samuel here. I'm deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore. He's a whiner. Neither the prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called you that you may reveal to me what I should do. So God's not answering him because Saul's in sin. Therefore Saul sins again and calls a medium to go get Samuel. That is very common when somebody is rebuked by the Lord and they will not receive that rebuke. They'll go and they'll turn to witchcraft or counsel, the world's counseling or man's advice, because they don't want to hear anymore from God on what they need to do. They just want to know how to make their life better, not how to get rid of their sin, how to defeat the Philistines, how to make their life better. So Saul turns to the medium. Samuel says, hey, by the way, you're going to be with me tomorrow. Samuel said, so why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? And the Lord has done to himself as he spoke to me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and has given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor executed his fierce wrath upon the Amalekites, the Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. He says, tomorrow you're going to die. The Lord's delivered you into their hands. So Saul passes out, has a episode, and the woman says, don't kill me, don't kill me. And she gives him some food. Now, 29 is David is going to go out and fight with the Philistines, because he's in Gath, remember? He's with the Philistines. And he's spared from fighting because one of the masters recognized the song that the women would sing. And they said, was it not said in dancing and saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David has slain his 10,000s? And so they say, let's not bring David because he might turn on us mid-battle and fight against us. And so they leave David behind, and David's spared from fighting with Saul, which David was not wanting to fight against the Lord's anointed. Chapter 30 is about David's left, and so he goes to the city of Ziklag, and the city of Ziklag was invaded by the Amalekites, and the Amalekites took all the women and children and the men and everybody and hauled them off. And so David takes off on a sprint to bring the people back from Ziklag. So Ziklag is here, and they go all the way down to, let's see. So David took his 600 men who were with him and came to the brook Beshor. There those stayed who were left behind. But David pursued, and with 400 men, for 200 stayed behind, who were weary and could not cross the brook Beshor. Then they found an Egyptian. They're getting south here. They found an Egyptian and brought him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate, and they said to him, drink water, and they gave to him a piece of cake, and he drank. And then David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where do you come from? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, a servant of the Amalekites. And I'm trying to find where they made it to. Okay, and David attacked the men from twilight until evening. Oh, okay. It doesn't say. Can you take me down to his troops? So the man said, swear by me to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master. I will take you down. So he takes them down to where they're camped. And when he had brought them down, there they were, spread out all over the land, eating and drinking and dancing because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the Philistines, from the land of Judah. Then David attacked them by twilight until evening the next day. Not a man of them escaped. 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. Except 400 men on camels who fled. So David recovers all of the city, everything, and takes it back. And then it says, verse 22, I like this verse. Then all the wicked and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, because they did not, there was 200 guys that were too tired to chase. They said, they don't get any of the spoil. They couldn't make it the rest of the way. And David says, no, there's part for those that were left behind and there's part for those that weren't. Okay, so chapter 31, we're getting through it. Last chapter. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Do we have some pictures? Yeah, some pictures there. So where was the fight at, Jason? This is at... Okay, so this is Mount Gilboa. And then the next slide is where they took Saul's body and hung it. Right here, Jay? Yep. So they killed Saul, and then they hung his body here. And... or just his head. They took his head off of his body. Okay, and then some... And so we'll read through it really quick. So, can you flip back one slide? That looks like a treacherous mountain to fight on. These guys were foot soldiers. Climbing to get away, for sure. Yeah, climbing. They were probably fighting in the valley, and he was climbing up that hill to try to get away from them. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. So they're running up the mountain trying to get away from them. The Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and his other sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. Then his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, and he fell on his sword and died with him. Not a very bright armor-bearer. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. Then the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those who were on the Jordan side, the side of the Jordan, saw the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead. They forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So it happened the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that there was found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim in it the land of the temple of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of Ashtoreth. Is that right? Ashtoreth? And they fastened his body on the wall of Beth Shahan. So they fastened his body, hung his body on the wall here of that city. And the Israelites were not going to have that. Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh, of Gilead, Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth Shaan. It's a shameful thing. It was a very, very shameful thing to hang Saul's body up for everybody to look at it. Cursed is the man that hangs from a tree. It was a cursing to hang. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarix tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So that is the end of 1 Samuel. What a stark picture of somebody that serves God and one who does not serve him. The contrast between David and Saul is so stark. David, everywhere he goes, the Lord is blessing him, and he's walking in humility. He calls everybody, he says, I'm your son to everybody. And David is walking in God's will, but not I wanted to touch on this. He's walking in God's will, but he's not aggressive about his rights. We often become very aggressive about our rights. I wanted to read 2 Peter 2, 21 through 23. Description of our Lord. 2 Peter 2, 21 through 24. 21 through 23. 1 Peter. That one's as a dog returns to his vomit. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. That was David. David said, you know what? I'm not going to fight against you, Saul. God is going to judge between you and me, and I'm not going to revile you when I suffer, and I'm going to trust in the Lord. And that is a beautiful picture that David has in his life of not grabbing onto something that God had said was his. Everything that has ever been created is Christ's, and God has told Christ that it's his. But Christ didn't come in authority. He came to serve, and David was a servant to Saul, even though Saul hated him. So I would like us to think about that. Isaiah 42. We're all familiar with this verse. Sorry for going so long, guys, but I just didn't want to miss this verse. Isaiah 42. He did not cry out, nor raise his voice, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed he did not break, and smoking flax he did not quench. He will bring forth justice for truth. Christ did not come along and break things. He built them back up. He did not, when he saw somebody, when somebody struck him on the cheek, he didn't turn and revile them. And that's what he told us. He told us that in Luke chapter 16, chapter 6, 29. He says, when you're struck on the one cheek, turn the other. So David was very much an example of Christ in that picture of Saul being jealous and wanting to kill him. David was saying, no, God is going to judge between us. I know that I'm the anointed king, but I'm going to let God judge you, Saul, and I'm not going to do it. So 1 Samuel, key verse, 1 Samuel 16:7, around 1000 BC. The last judges is Samuel. The rise and fall of Saul is the second section. So last judges is 1 through 7. Rise and fall of Saul is 8 through 15. And what we just covered is rise of David, 16 through 31. So God bless you. And hopefully this has been encouraging for you. And we will see you next time. Let's pray and thank the Lord for this time. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you show us such an amazing example of somebody who trusts in you to avenge them and somebody who wants to avenge themselves and is full of bitterness. Lord, we thank you for your word and we thank you for tonight. Amen. Okay, we will see you all next time.